so the pain started when you were in your early 20s, and in your looking back on, your activity level, your health, your fitness, and all that. Can you think of anything that predisposed you to developing the pain at that age?
It's tough to think. I think some of the predisposition is just the way my body is built. I'm tall and I'm slim. My dad is built similarly, and he's been incredibly active his whole life. Worked as a carpenter. He still can do 100 miles on his bike in a day. And despite being active, he still struggled with back pain as well. So I think some of the predisposition is the way my body is built. And then when it comes to, non-physical factors, I think, I was putting a lot of energy into my work. I was putting a lot of energy into a relationship at the time. And I just didn't really have the resources, internal or external, to manage that amount of stress and that amount of pressure and still take care of myself. Yeah, I think it's an area that's vulnerable and will require me to be more attentive and more physically fit than most people to be pain-free. I think I have a higher mountain to climb. I think it's, certainly doable. But I've known a lot of people in my life that have been less active and taken worse care of themselves and haven't developed this kind of debilitating back pain.
Okay. And when we met, we worked together. So this was like less than a year ago when we started working together doing acupuncture for your back.
Yeah, I think it was probably in the vicinity of 9 months, 9 or 10 ago.
And we worked together for several months. I remember it was through the holidays. And you were also doing like physical therapy, and I think you were working with some kind of trainer or some kind of movement coach. And then you disappeared for a while, and you were good.
Yeah, I disappeared for a short time and I was good. And then I hurt myself sort of early on into taking a break from our time working together.
Yes. Had you continued your movement practice, what you had worked on with your coach and your PT?
So this was through the holidays. I mean, certainly not to the extent that I should have. Winter was tough for me. The last few winters have been tougher for me to stay on top of my, schedule and my habits. I think a whirlwind of mental health and situational stuff put me in a situation where I didn't really have the energy or the attention or the drive to do what I had to do. I was doing physical therapy as well. And so that was sort of heading into the spring, and I had, I think, a couple months that were kind of tough there. And then it was March when I was like, you know what, weather's getting better. It's time for me to be serious about my health. I went rock climbing. I'd started, I'd been, walking a lot already, but I'd started doing more activities, and I was starting to schedule more physical, physical stuff, combining physical activity and social things in a way that I hadn't before. And it was sort of early on in trying to set myself on a better path that I wound up hurting myself playing beach volleyball.
I've heard from a number of people, some of whom are professional athletes or trainers, that like sand can be very tricky. And I know more than one person who's had a knee injury or back injury or calf injury or something like that. So you told me the story a few weeks ago about the injury. You said that you were playing volleyball and you felt something a little bit funny, but you didn't think anything of it, right? And then later that day, you came home and you were preparing dinner, right? And then the pain started to become more severe.
So it's sort of, there was an acute onset. I couldn't pinpoint the exact movement, which sort of threw me off a little bit, but I was in the middle of playing a game. And I immediately kind of, Tanner, please.
Let him bark.
Okay. And I felt this really bizarre lack of strength and this sort of shooting, vibrating, shimmering pain in my right leg. And I actually kind of had to like carry my leg off the court, like as I was walking off.
Okay.
I finished the last few points, which I shouldn't have done. Lesson learned. And so it was pretty acute, and it felt like it got in check over the next hour or so. And I should have, second step would have been canceling my plans and resting. But unfortunately, followed through with those plans. And I do think the ensuing, 12 to 18 hours of activity contributed to the severity of the injury.
Okay.
Yeah, and the injury itself was a pretty severe disc herniation, L4, L5. And I know, you're familiar with the structure of the discs, but it's, like a jelly donut. There's, a liquid on the inside. A bulging disc is when that bulges, and a herniation is when it actually rips and the liquid on the inside comes out. And that liquid doesn't have very far to go. And it depends a little bit on your build, how tight all your nerves are to the spinal column. And I think, again, being somebody who's slim, there's not as much space there for me. So the extrusion from that disc, that crazy, reverberating, shimmering pain, was my nerves sort of getting trapped by the extrusion of the disc. So the extrusion from the disc, was trapping the nerve, and that was sort of the kind of bizarre, unusual pain I felt on the spot. And the majority of the truly severe pain was nerve pain, from that nerve being trapped. And I dealt with, severe pain in that leg, for really more or less 12 weeks. Some of it navigable on crutches, other times, I would get out of bed 2 or 3 times a day, just to use the bathroom and to try to eat.
And that would be it. The rest of the time you would be in bed.
Yeah. I mean, I was in bed, and even on days as I started to get better, I would still spend, it started at like 23 hours a day in bed, then 22, and then 21. And I'm down to like maybe 15 to 18 hours a day in bed, sometimes 20 still. It kind of depends.
Okay.
But yeah, that was severe, debilitating, frightening pain, to be completely frank.
Okay.
Completely disabled, not just disabled, but also just in excruciating pain all the time. It's pretty exhausting.
So the pain was excruciating, and you felt completely disabled, and it was very frightening. And is it still that way? Is it still frightening and disabling, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
And
yeah.
And that is, you attribute that to having had surgery recently.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think.
Did I just put words in your mouth?
No, not at all. Nope, not at all.
Okay, good. You turned a corner after surgery, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's been difficult for me throughout the whole process, when I first hurt myself, I had a doctor that I'd already been seeing for my spine. He'd already recommended I get an MRI, which insurance had, declined for whatever reason. And over those first, the first week and a half, I just didn't get any sufficient attention from my doctor. I had to call, 20 times to get somebody to even fill me basic prescriptions. I found out, a few weeks in that they should have been prescribing me gabapentin. Of course they should have. Everybody I spoke to was like, oh, why don't they give you gabapentin for nerve pain, And so I felt really just completely alone. And none of my doctors were even acknowledging the fact that, like, oh, we see patients with this happens. I had a patient that had, it's sciatica pain, technically, like, I didn't have anybody saying, yeah, somebody went through this recently, here's how it went, here's what to expect. And there was just really a total lack of support outside of the most basic, simple things, which are, get an MRI and we'll think about surgery. And so for me, it was really eye-opening. At the end of the day, surgery was what I needed. But the limitation of the Western medicine approach throughout that whole process was really pretty alarming to me, to not have anybody really seeming to even empathize with the amount of pain that I was in, not seeming to take it seriously. not seeming to prioritize the fact that I'm in pain to try to help me get out of pain. And that was, one of the things that's always been unique about seeing you is the amount of attention that you pay to my body is not, I've been to 8 or 10 physical therapists. I've never, ever had somebody, with that attention to detail that you have, going, so, okay, here's the piriformis, here's this muscle. Does it feel this way? Okay, let me try this. And I think aside from, the obvious, clinically provable effects of, cupping and acupuncture, there was an enormous comfort the first session that we had after the injury where it was like, oh, like somebody's actually paying attention to my body again, as opposed to just like, yeah, come back in 3 weeks.
I see.
And
this is something we have not discussed.
Yeah, so, no, it's not.
So
yeah.
your early experience was that you could not get what felt like adequate or complete conversation on the phone or in person with your doctor.
Yeah, I couldn't get it on the phone or in person. I went from, one hospital to another, and it got slightly better with the second doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, just one, while I'm sort of, it's on my mind, and as I've learned, through, different doctors and through working with you and, different movement coaches, chiropractors, et cetera, our physical health is something that reacts to every single movement that we make, every breath we take, the way we sit, the way we stand. And these are the most important things, managing our bodies ourselves is the most, I think, the biggest contributor to lasting success and lasting health. And so while I ultimately did wind up needing surgery for the severity of the herniation and the way that it attached itself to the nerve, it was really wild that I was seeing these specialists and nobody was saying like, okay, well, think about how you're getting out of bed in the morning. Okay, well, how are you sitting? Well, how are you, flexing your spine, or is your pelvis anteverted? Where is the bend? Okay, so if the extrusion is on the back, then let's avoid moving in this direction. I got none of that from my doctors. And I got some of that from you, and I got some of that from another family friend who has been a chiropractor. But it was really going outside of the hospital network where it felt like people were actually talking about and understanding the importance of how I carry myself every day.
So can you talk about, can you get into the details about the steps you took the first 1-2 weeks? You said you went from hospital to hospital. You also tried to talk to your physician who you'd been working with for a while. Like what was the first place you went to for help? Was it a hospital?
So I had, I was working with a doctor at Weill Cornell because that's where my PCP is. I've had great experience there. I had surgery there earlier in the year. Generally great experience. I'd been to him previously probably about the time I started seeing you, because I was getting some back pain. I was getting the beginnings of nerve pain, which after surgery, it looked like the disc had herniated, a year ago, maybe, around that timeline.
I see.
So I sort of conveniently, I hurt myself on a Saturday, and I had a follow-up appointment scheduled for that Thursday with my specialist. And so I called the office Monday morning saying, I have a serious injury. I can't do anything. I'm in excruciating pain. There's absolutely nothing I can do. I can't move in any way without shouting in pain. I don't have sufficient painkillers. I don't have anything. I don't know what to do. I thought the only way I would get out of my house was on a stretcher. That was the only way that I could have possibly. I still haven't sat down in a car. Every time I've gone to or from a hospital, my dad has driven me in the back of a station wagon lying down. And I'd seen the doctor and said, hey, I've been dealing with a lot of pain for a very long time. I explained it, and he said, let's get an MRI. And then insurance said, well, are you sure you need an MRI? Have you tried other things? And there's nothing else to try. You have to get an MRI to look at the spine. And so almost as a formality to get the MRI approved, we set that follow-up appointment
I see.
2 weeks before I got hurt. But up until that Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I called that office probably 30 times. The doctor said he would call me back. He didn't call me back. They said a nurse practitioner would call me. They didn't call me. When they finally did call, the only reason they prescribed not even like narcotic painkillers, but any kind of painkillers, was because I said over and over, like, I'm taking Advil, I'm taking Tylenol, that's not touching the pain. And so those first, 3 days were some of the most excruciating pain. And it just was very clear that the office and the doctors and the nurses there didn't have the capacity to care for me. I don't want to, speculate as to why that is, or all I can speak to is my experience, but it was really, truly horrendous. And when I finally did see the doctor for that follow-up appointment on Thursday, he said he'd put in for narcotics, thankfully, because I did absolutely need to take narcotic pain medication for a decent stretch over the last few months. But then he didn't call the prescription in on time. He was supposed to rush an MRI order, and the office didn't even put the order in for a day and a half when they said it was supposed to be getting approved during that time. I had to call the insurance myself. I sort of demanded to be switched to a new doctor. The new doctor they transferred me to, I think, had been told by the previous doctor that I was, somehow problematic, and she gave me zero attention. And so then I switched hospitals, and then I had to restart and see a new specialist for the first time. And he was much better. He recommended a book that I read, and that was helpful. It was nice to see an approach beyond just, well, we'll do imaging and then maybe surgery. But, still not really the amount of attention that I thought I needed. I was in a crisis, I was in a state of emergency, at that point. It had been a few weeks, and it didn't feel like anybody that I was speaking to was even willing to acknowledge the extent of my pain, which also made me question, do they believe me how much pain I'm in? Am I actually in this much pain? I started questioning my experience, sort of in the way that, somebody who's being gaslit by an abuser, might question, their sanity. I started to think, what am I doing? Is this, is my reality, my reality? Because the response to it was just grossly insufficient, and so
and you said you didn't want to go ahead.
Okay, well, I was going to sort of try to chronologically wrap it up a little bit. 3 weeks after the injury, I went to see the surgeon, and the surgeon said, these things usually go away on their own. Let's give it at least 3 more weeks. And then, the choice was mine whether or not to go with surgery, and it kept feeling like I was getting better. I'd go 3, 4, 5 days moving in the right direction, and then I'd have an enormous setback, and I'd be right back to square one. And I think after my 5th or 6th cycle through that, I was like, okay, this nerve pain's not going anywhere. Surgery is the route. And I did have the surgery about 12 weeks, almost to the day after getting hurt. And it was successful. And the piece of disc that was problematic is removed. There was a lot of it, apparently, some of it new, some of it old. But that is, the acute problem of one aspect of the pain. And now I have, 3 months of bed rest to recover from. I have a lot of strength to build back up. So the majority of the journey, despite the fact that the acute pain has cleared up, I'm still very much in the infancy of recovery here.
And at this point, how are they treating you? Are you doing physical therapy twice a week, once a week? Are you somebody seeing you in an office?
So post-surgery, I'm not even at 2 weeks yet. And so physical therapy, they don't recommend starting for at least 2, sometimes up to 4 weeks. So once I have my follow-up, which is in 7 or 8 days, I'll see my surgeon again. And then he'll give me a prescription, which also is frustrating. When I was getting physical therapy previously, my doctor wasn't telling the physical therapists what to do. And so I was getting there, and I had physical therapists that didn't understand my injury, didn't understand the severity. And, I actually hurt myself pretty severely at physical therapy because they didn't have a prescription. And we're also, I don't think, qualified to be handling an injury of my severity.
So the doctor wasn't communicating with the PT. And
no. Now the
surgeon, they were just kind of flying blind once you arrived there. Brand new case, getting to know you, no information having arrived beforehand. And you had already had your MRI by this point.
I had my MRI, and I explained the findings to her, and I think I even shared a write-up, maybe. But still, I don't think that physical therapy place is run correctly, and I don't think that the woman who was treating me should have been leading on a case of my severity with a real lack of experience with similar injuries.
Okay. And I may or may not include this in the recording. How do you know she had a lack of experience with similar injuries?
Just by the way she was treating me, it was just so obvious that she didn't understand, or she maybe wasn't listening to me sufficiently. I mean, I told her I hadn't sat, I hadn't been sitting for months, and she had me doing exercises that involved like sort of sitting to squatting. That was how I hurt myself was, she wanted me to sit on a chair with the ball squeezed between my legs and sit and stand 3 reps of 10. It's like, I haven't sat down in 2 months. Like, why do you think it's okay for me to do 30 reps of sitting and standing, over and over again? And also, I don't want to write anybody off that's young, but she was very, very young, clearly had just finished school. And she was the only physical therapist at that location. So there was nobody else there who was, more experienced and had the ability to oversee and, for her to learn from, you know what I mean? Like, dealing with stuff like, these kinds of injuries, it requires a lot of knowledge, and knowledge that traditionally, kinesthetic knowledge that was passed down traditionally, within families and within communities. And we very much lost that. And so now our professionals are starting from a blank slate. There isn't, hundreds or thousands of years of understanding of our body. It's sort of somebody goes and learns about it for a few years, and then, they're experts. And again, physical therapy, this last stretch was like, oh, do these exercises, do that. No discussion about what to do on my own time, other than the exercises. There wasn't an understanding of how I'm standing or how I'm walking, or there was no do this and let's see how you respond and we'll adjust it. It was like, yeah, do 10 of these and then 20 of those and 30 of these and then you're good.
See, okay, wow. So you did the PT for a little while, and I think that was about it was about 8 or 9 weeks in when you contacted me and you asked for an acupuncture house call. And am I right in the timeline?
Yeah, you're right in the timeline. And I reached out to you. I hurt myself at physical therapy like on a Friday, and I think I reached out to you the following, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of the next week.
Okay.
And so that had been after a few more days of really excruciating pain when I was expecting, I was hoping that I was done with those kinds of setbacks.
Yeah. So you'd had a few setbacks already. You're like 7, 8 weeks in, you had a few setbacks, you go to physical therapy, you work with this person who it seems like doesn't have any knowledge about your case or about how to deal with an injury, your severity, from things like, I can't sit, I haven't been sitting. They have you doing things like sitting, and very little guidance on, how to position yourself while laying down, how to get on and off the toilet, how to get around the house, stuff like that. And then you have another setback. So the pain increases and your mobility goes down. And that's when you called and said, Kim, can I have a house call? And I usually don't do house calls, but I knew you. I had worked with you already, so I knew your body. And I knew that there had been some up and down throughout several years. And you told me that it was really severe, and you couldn't, I believe you said you couldn't really walk except to make it to and from the toilet. And you weren't capable of traveling outside the apartment. Like walking outside the apartment, being in a car was out of the question.
Yeah. The only traveling I was doing was walking a block and a half to physical therapy. And the reason I chose that because it was closest to my apartment. It was the only place I could make it. Yeah. Okay. And that was after my parents caring for me full time for 3-4 weeks at least.
But unlike in some people in some parts of the world, you don't live with your parents. You don't have people there taking care of you. It's, if I remember correctly, it's you and a roommate.
It is, yeah. And the roommate is a very good friend of mine, and he's done much, much more than you would expect from, just a roommate. So he's been, he is family for me, so he was able to provide a lot of support. But I don't want to ask him for the amount of support that I was getting from my parents, which was helping me roll over in bed, feeding me. I mean, I ate lying down for weeks and weeks and weeks.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So when I reached out to you, I'd had already that setback from physical therapy. And and I'd had a very bad weekend, and my week was not getting better. And that's when I was,
Yeah.
I reached out to you, and I remember talking to my mom, because the entire time we were like, what is the missing piece of this treatment? Because we were just appalled, really, at the lack of care and the lack of attention. And I was like, well, I really liked what's the work I did with Steve. When I first started seeing you, some of that chronic pain, a lot of it was, muscular, I think, due to poor skeletal, stuff. Like I've had, bad posture, etc. And you really made a huge impact pre-injury. And that was sort of what allowed me to get back on my feet. And unrelated, I had a surgery on my nose, which, knocked me out for a few weeks. And it was as I was sort of recovering from that bed rest when I hurt myself. And I don't think I was going slowly enough. But when I reached out to you, my mom and I were both, it's like, maybe, Steve's going to be like that missing piece. Maybe he's going to provide the amount of attention that nobody else has. And when you came for that first acupuncture treatment, it was clear. I mean, it's what we've always done. You've gone through and you've identified specific muscles. You've asked important, thoughtful questions. You've obviously paid attention to my body. And after that treatment, there was relief from the cupping and from the acupuncture, but also just to be like, okay, somebody at least sees me. Somebody at least is paying attention to my body. Somebody that knows more than I do is looking at this, aside from the lens of surgery or no surgery. You know what I mean? It was literally the hospital, the hospital care was sort of, we have one lever we can pull, which is surgery. And then you can go do physical. There's two, surgery, physical therapy. But,
and in between, you're going to experience some aloneness and some confusion and some frustration.
Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah.
I remember telling you that I would only do the acupuncture if we did a whole thing, acupuncture and a few movement sessions combined, because once you told me how severe it was clear to me that just acupuncture, at least my acupuncture skills, were not going to cure this for good. And that's really what I'm interested in. That's what I find to be most gratifying, is to try to help people turn a corner. So we did the acupuncture visit. You felt good after that, right? And then we did some movement sessions by Zoom. And how did you do after those? Like compared to before, how were you?
Yeah, I did. So the situation for me was pretty unique, just to the severity of the herniation of the disc. And so doing the movement sessions with you, it was great to feel like there was attention to detail in a way that there hadn't been, an understanding of my injury and the way my body works. But there was residual nerve pain just from being active, because I'd been in bed. I would get nerve pain from walking down the stairs to do a session, from walking around the block. But I could tell that the quality of care and the attention was just vastly beyond what I'd gotten in physical therapy. So again, it was, there is a huge emotional component to healing. And part of that is feeling heard and feeling understood and feeling like somebody's, empathizing and looking out for you in a way that, a professional who's treating 300 patients, in a month is, it's just not going to be able to care the same way.
Yeah, and I was prepared that I may or may not be able to help you get better. You may or may not get after acupuncture and movement. And I think I made that clear. Hopefully, I made it clear.
Yes.
That it's worth a try, but I don't know what's going to happen, and we just have to try the fullest approach, the most comprehensive approach that we can, and that'll give us the best shot. So did you have a decrease in symptoms, in the severity of symptoms? Did you have an increase in range of motion after the two movement sessions that we had? Or was everything the same?
No, there was definitely some increase in motion.
Increase in range of motion.
Yeah, I had been favoring, so significantly, I wasn't able to function normally due to the pain. And so some of the movement stuff that we were doing was returning my awareness to certain parts of my body that had been completely neglected. And I do recall, going for like a walk with crutches, of course, after one of our sessions and feeling like, oh, like it feels like I'm going in the right direction here.
So you were moving a little bit more with less consequence afterwards, like less pain, less debility, less loss of strength, less symptoms after moving.
Yeah.
And then overall, were you having less pain, less symptoms, less numbness, tingling, or was that about the same, or was it worse?
Well, I think it's tricky because the nerve pain in some ways I think is unrelated because of the severity of my nerve pain.
Mm-hmm.
The non-surgical treatments, while meaningful and impactful, the nerve pain was so severe in the amount of disc that was extruded. The nerve pain, I think, was changing not based on how healthy I was being, but literally on how the disc might settle that day, because there were fragments of disc. And so I might not move at all, and it might get stuck in the wrong way. I might move, it might alleviate. So the nerve pain seemed somewhat independent. I could tell the work I was doing was important, and sort of realizing that there was a distinction between this nerve pain and the non-surgical treatment. That was part of when I was like, okay, I think I'm at the point where surgery needs to happen. I do think it was the right move because that disc had to come out. There was no way for physical therapy or movement work or for acupuncture. The disc dissolves over time. And I had too much disc for that to be feasible. I wasn't about to be in pain. It could have been 6, 8, 12 months, and you were very upfront, here's what we want to do. And I wanted to avoid surgery, I think everybody does. But I think, there's the acute nerve pain and the regenerative, restorative health that I'm going to have to focus on are sort of separate. And I had to, the pain, the disc needed to be removed by surgery. And now it's up to me and you, to work on how to get my body back to where I want it to be now that the disc has been removed.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a little bit more movement, and it certainly you had some emotional support and maybe some you had somebody's attention, singular, like focused attention on you, and some acknowledgement, and all of that was part of the healing experience. But the pain level itself, the nerve pain, did not decrease.
The nerve pain fluctuated throughout everything I tried, and I think that was kind of important for me to realize, was that the nerve pain was independent from me getting healthy again. And that's when I decided,
Sure.
and the surgeon decided, and my family said, yeah, like, let's get the disc out of there. But I did.
Now how's the nerve pain?
The nerve pain's gone. I get little shimmers of it occasionally. But in my instance, I was a good candidate for surgery, and it worked out well. It was a micro discectomy. They just removed that piece of disc.
Right.
But after our sessions, I could still tell, and I know the emotional component is part of it, but also, understanding, where to hold, my muscles and my abs, how to do specific exercises that I used to do in PT that I have to modify now because of the kind of pain that I'm in. There was a lot that we covered that was impactful. And once I recover from the surgery and I'm allowed to start moving again, I'm at, square 2 or 3 as opposed to square 1.
That's great. All right. So you're finally moving forward. And since when was the surgery? 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And you said it was a microdiscectomy. So for people who don't know what that is, can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, definitely. So, like we said, the disc is sort of like a jelly donut. It extrudes a herniation. It extrudes the liquid on the inside, which hardens and can attach to the nerve. And that material is also, it's acidic's not the right term, but it's an agitating, the material itself causes inflammation. So I was getting a lot of inflammation from that. And so the microdiscectomy, for what they do essentially is a little incision in your back. They go to specifically that spot. In my instance, it was L4, L5. It could be, I think it's typically done for lumbar. And they go in, and all they're doing is they're removing the pieces of disc that have extruded from, the pieces of, the liquid that have hardened. They're removing those pieces. And if there's any liquid that seems like it's about to come out of the disc, they'll remove that as well. And so now, I have less fluid in my L4, L5 disc, which is something I'll have to be cognizant of moving forward. The disc never fully heals. It doesn't regenerate fully. But, through the appropriate care and, physical activity, I should be able to build up the strength around my spine to limit the amount of compromising stress in that, specifically lower lumbar for me.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about a small incision and the removal of some material that's attaching itself to the nerve or irritating the nerve and also causing an inflammation, which is a form of swelling, which in addition to the piece of the disc or the material from the disc, the swelling is creating distension or mass where there's no room for it.
There's
so
no
the swelling
room
itself, then presses on other stuff like other nerves, right? So all together, those two things, basically the disc and the swelling, start to create the symptoms,
more or less,
which can be
that like constant pressure on the nerve. And so that from the lower lumbar, that nerve travels all the way through my foot. And so I would have pain that would originate in the low back, sort of like the right buttock, and it would run down my thigh. It would wrap around the front of my shin. I remember, telling my parents at one point that it felt like my shin had been like split open with an axe. The pain was just so severe. And you're exactly right. I mean, it's just the nerve should not have pressure, and there was mass and swelling, which was leading, in my instance, to more or less constant pressure on that nerve, which, obviously is not long-term something you want to live with.
And we're talking about a small incision between two vertebrae. We're not talking about an incision, the length of 4 or 5 vertebrae and, anything like, and not anything as extensive as the surgeries they used to do like 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, back surgery is light years.
Parts of the vertebrae.
Yeah. And they used to take off parts of the vertebrae. They would fuse the spinal bones together. So this is, maybe a 2-inch incision. Hasn't fully healed yet, so I don't know what the scar is going to look like. But it was small. I mean, I went home from the hospital. They filled it with that like super gluey kind of stitching, and just one strip of steri-strip tape over it, and that's all it was. So
and as far as your mobility, what did they tell you could expect? In the past, when they would fuse vertebrae or put steel rods or whatever kind of rods in people's spines, that would mean that the vertebrae would not be able to turn ultimately. And typically people who have any kind of disc herniation, extrusion, and especially those who are recovering from surgery, they're told not to twist. Don't do twisting motions during the recovery until they clear you for that. But did they tell you long term, like what kind of mobility you could expect? Can you swim? Can you do yoga? Can you lift weights? Can you
long term,
walk,
I should be able to do everything everybody else does.
I see. That was out of the question 30, 40 years ago.
Oh yeah, back surgery used to mean that your life was forever changed.
That's right. Your back is going to atrophy. You can never use it anywhere near the extent that you once were. Okay, great. That's fantastic. All right, good. And then you also had some disc desiccation. I remember reading in your MRI report recently, right? And was that also in the area where the extrusion was, or was that the disc above or below it?
So there was a second herniation. There still is, I think. The L5S1, or I mean L5S, whatever it is. So there is a S1, smaller herniation. I think, some of my back pain in the past, I think, was a result of disc herniations as well. So there is degenerative, my discs have degenerated at, I'm 33 years old. So it's not what you want, certainly when you're my age. But the discs, just because there has been degeneration does not mean that it needs to continue. And so I do know firsthand, friends of friends that had microdiscectomies and run marathons and do triathlons and, do yoga. And so I am hoping and expecting to be able to do that as well. It's going to take more time and attention than most people need to spend with their body. But having seen the alternative, for me, there's really no other way to do it.
Yeah, and like you said, you're aware that your back is going to need more work, more strengthening, more attention than most people. But it sounds like you're, I don't know, congenitally or genetically perfectly capable of getting all of your mobility back and all of your strength back, because you're saying that your father's a carpenter and he like does all this, semi contortionist stuff in the process of working, and he hauls stuff around, and he has back pain. So it's not as though you're not capable of doing it. Right? It's just going to take you a bit more work, a bit more like focused work than most people. Great.
Yeah.
All right. So you feel like you turned a corner, and you have the wave you were describing, where you would have a few good days and then severe intense pain. You haven't experienced that since the surgery, 2 weeks since the surgery.
No,
right?
and I
Great.
don't expect to. Now that the disc
Right.
is no longer there,
Right.
the nerve, there should be nothing within the vicinity of the nerve. I would have to seriously re-herniate in order to get pressure back on that nerve, or God forbid something breaks. You know what I mean? Short of new trauma, this should be exclusively in the right direction as I can.
Okay. All right. I have seen one thing happen, and that is a mimicking of the original pain, because sometimes the muscles retain a memory. Right. So let's say that your piriformis muscle, which is a really common one, or some of the muscles in your legs, like your thigh or your hamstring, let's say that they were tight throughout the whole 12 weeks that you had pain until you had the surgery. Right. One thing that can happen is that because of that seizing of the muscle, our body learns to keep that side very, very tight, and sometimes that'll return from time to time, and that can compress the nerves, which then mimics some of the pain, or mimics sometimes some of the weakness on that side. But there's nothing pressing on, there's no like new, even if there's no extrusion or no new disc thing or that. It can be a recurrence of symptoms, although they're usually nowhere near the severity of what you've been through. But I just want you to be prepared that the body does that sometimes. The body keeps the score. there's a memory in our muscles that's neurological, that's beyond our conscious prediction, right? Just like there's a memory in our gut. You get food poisoning once, and then you smell that same food later and you feel nauseous. You're not poisoned again. You're just you have that somatic memory. The body stores that memory, for sure. So I don't want to scare you. I just want you to keep that in mind.
I expect to continue to be some setbacks, certainly. But I don't think to the same severity. And I think a lot of the work now, like you're saying, is removing that memory. I've been moving for a quarter of a year, working around a severe injury. And so my body has adapted. And so over the next, weeks and months and years, realistically, it's going to be retraining these muscles on how to be healthy and how to support my spine in a way that limits this kind of injury in the future. And as you start to relearn how to move, you're probably also going to unlock, you're going to start to feel stronger in ways that you didn't know was possible. When we start to use our body in a more balanced way and start to understand what it means to lift and get up and sit down, and all those things, do yoga with correct skeletal alignment, it starts to get easier, actually. Deadlifting can feel really easy. Squatting, whether it's with a ball in and out of a chair, or with a kettlebell or a barbell or whatever, or body weight, can start to feel a whole lot easier. So I wish you many pleasant surprises on your journey of training and retraining. So you said in the beginning that you felt like really alone, right? And it sounded, I could hear that you were really frustrated and you were really angry about not getting the care that you needed, especially in the beginning, and kind of being handed off, and orders for diagnostic tests or prescriptions not being called in, not being done. You having to like really step in and advocate for yourself with that. And
did you find any kind of comfort in when you were in the midst of all that? Was there
Um,
anything that you were able to think about or do for yourself that that was a reliable way for you to, or an effective way for you to self-soothe or to contact a source of patience, or not really?
I mean, I took very real comfort in the fact that I had family that was able to provide for me.
See.
I would not have gotten through this without the support of my parents. I mean, I would have had to rely on my friends in a way that I was not comfortable doing. So there was some real comfort there. Generally, a lot of the time, I was just focused on distracting myself as best I could. There's real, emotional and mood implications of being in pain. And so I spent as much time as I could just trying to not acknowledge the pain, trying to find ways to distract myself. It was a lot of movies. I didn't read as much because even reading was active, you know what I mean? And I had to
Okay.
choose to give my attention to what I was reading as opposed to the pain. And I
Yeah.
found that it was honestly easier for me to try to put something on. And that's not who I am as a person. I like to read. I like to hike and
Mhm.
climb and see people. It was very unlike me to just try to shut
Mhm.
my brain off.
Okay.
I am now sort of just pulling myself out of those habits and saying like, oh, like I don't need to watch a movie in bed. Like I can read,
Mhm.
try to fall asleep at a better time.
Mhm.
So I really
Mhm.
cut myself a lot of slack throughout
Mhm.
that time, just
Mhm.
acknowledging it was temporary, 2 or 3 months feels like forever, but it is,
Mhm.
it's a fraction of 1 year. So I did try to keep that perspective as best I could. Um, and I always have been, a spiritual person and somebody who really seeks a lot, which can have its ups and its downs. But through a lot of the pain, I had a very hard time tapping into those resources. And it really just came down to how can I get through today with as little time, being miserable as possible.
Mhm. Mhm. So people describe pain sometimes as being like constant noise, or they describe it as like something that they have to manage constantly. I'm sorry, there's heavy traffic outside. Looks like a school bus is loading students on, and no one behind the bus has any more fucks to give.
Yeah.
Fuck. So people describe like the mental and emotional effects of pain in various ways. They say things like, it's really exhausting because you're having to expend energy on, like you said, not paying attention to the pain or distracting yourself. Or it is itself a constant distraction that's like noise in the background all the time. How would you put it? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, what is it like to be in that level of pain?
Yeah. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. Um, and I think much of what we do spiritually boils down to being present, being in a
Mhm.
moment. We all experience, only one moment at a time. We travel through time, but it is all now, it is exclusively
Mhm.
now. And
Mhm.
as a musician, that is your canvas. I'm a musician. So there's, I love being locked in to my music. And that's part of what's beautiful about getting people together and listening to music together, because you're all experiencing time. You're all choosing to give your attention to a specific thing. A movie, same sort of thing. And I was talking about reading earlier. Like, reading's different, you go at your own pace. But these other art forms, spiritual practices, meditation, yoga, etc., it's all focused on this one moment because it's all we have, and the more we can focus on it, the better. And what's so oppressive about pain is that it hijacks that time for you. You don't
Mhm.
have the ability to say, oh, I would like to spend this time, really focusing on the dishes as I wash them, or focusing on the
mhm,
way my feet are falling on the concrete, or listening to all of the sounds around me. It's sort of, like having your least favorite band, pumped into your ears at all times, or having like Friends on without the laugh track or something. You know what I mean? It's just
mhm,
really
mhm,
cruel and unusual punishment.
mm,
Um, and so really a lot of the battle for me was, how do I take my attention away from this constant pain
mhm.
and apply it to literally anything else? And that was where,
Okay.
movies came in for me, or music. I spent a lot of time. I bought a lot of music, a lot of records, listened a lot. So for me, it was, how do I take that attention back? And when the pain was its
Mhm,
most severe and its most intense, there was just, there was nothing you could do. There were times, hours on end, where I would lie in bed and the pain required my attention. It felt like, the pain was so severe and so intense that my
mhm.
body, for whatever reason, it felt like I needed to pay attention to the pain in order for it to process, in order for me to avoid hyperventilating or sweating or feeling like I was going to throw up.
Okay. So sometimes your body was starting to take over, starting to react to the pain, and you did feel that it was better for you to be present with the pain in those moments, to have a little more
Like,
choice over how you were breathing and how you were
yeah,
reacting.
I'm not, yeah, no, I think because there's a piece of me that, feels like it's Stockholm syndrome in a way. Like, I'm being held
Hmm.
captive by the pain and I'm trying to find a silver lining in it. But no, I think some
Hmm.
of the pain, it required attention to breath. It required attention to
Hmm.
the body. It required stillness. And that was sort of why I was in this, battle of distraction and attention, because I know that my body does better when I pay attention to it. But, mentally, how long can you pay attention to pain for?
Hmm. Hmm. So some of the things you found helpful were music and then movies. And do you want to talk at all about like cannabis, or I know that you got some like really high grade high grade cannabis oil.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I have a hard time imagining what this period would have been like without cannabis.
mhm,
And I have been, a pretty consistent user since I was like 18, more or less.
mhm,
And it's got ups and downs. I'm
mhm,
perfectly happy to admit that there are side effects, which I try to mitigate
mhm,
in my everyday life, which is why I'm not constantly consuming cannabis.
mhm,
But in this instance, I do think that, the full spectrum oil that I was using, I think there
mhm,
were, real impacts on mitigating the pain, but also it would allow me to detach myself from that pain sometimes and apply my attention elsewhere. Um,
mhm.
because
Elsewhere to like music or
yeah,
stuff
exactly.
like that. I
Yep, to
see.
music or to movie,
So,
or sometimes it would even give me the strength and the stillness to say, let's just be here for a minute. Let's see how the body's feeling. Let's gauge the amount of pain that we're in. And then
mm.
what's the process? How do we try to get through this?
And you know a hell of a lot more about cannabis, especially like the present offerings that are available to people than I do. So what would you recommend someone look for, or someone try to find who's experiencing intense pain, who's in like the early stages of that?
Yeah. So generally what's recommended, there's a few terms for it. Rick Simpson oil is a name that's thrown around a lot. Rick Simpson was a cancer patient in, I think, Canada. And he was the first person to really make full spectrum, meaning capturing all of the plant into an
Mhm.
oil. A lot of what we consume recreationally, if it's like a vapor cartridge or something, a lot of the time they just extract just THC or just CBD, and they're extracting certain things from the plant. Um,
Mhm.
but hypothetically, you can create THC in a lab. You know what I mean? So I could have THC from a plant or THC from a lab, and if it's just THC, it's very similar. And they used to treat cancer with Marinol, which were THC caplets. And I think part of the evolution over time is acknowledging, like, hey, like, we don't know everything about everything around us. If people
Mhm.
have been using plants a certain way for thousands of years, maybe there's something we don't fully understand yet. um, and so, yeah, so there's, Rick Simpson oil, full spectrum, we'll call it. Generally, it is recommended to consume orally. It just reacts
Mhm.
differently in your body, and it works better for pain. I was still,
Mhm.
I was smoking occasionally, and I have, like a full spectrum vapor pen, which I was using more mentally. It was less for treating pain and more like I'm in a
Mhm.
really bad spot, and how can I try to regain some
Mhm.
control of my attention.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
think that the oral full spectrum cannabis did a lot for managing the pain and just allowing me to relax my body, because I spent so much time, I'd find, just with muscles squeezed and tight, and I might not be aligned the right way because I'm just doing anything to not pay attention to my body, and the cannabis
Mhm.
helped sort of
Yeah.
regulate, self-regulate a lot and allow me to focus on what I needed to.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So the Rick Simpson oil, or that type of oil, um, it's not a it's not a it contains THC, right?
Yes.
It's not simply a CBD supplement. Um,
Yep. Yeah, and
I'm
it
just reading a thing
contains
that says
different
it's
kinds
made
of
by.
THC as well, because each
Okay.
each strain of cannabis has different levels of THCA,
Right.
THCC, CBDA.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's all these
Yes.
different chemicals. Then there's terpenes as well. So there's this
Mhm.
each plant has a very diverse
Mhm.
amount of chemicals in it and in different quantities. And so
Mhm.
the full spectrum captures everything there. And,
Mhm.
as opposed to saying, oh, we think this works, we think that works, and trying to pull out just a certain aspect, the full spectrum is more of a surrendering a little bit to Mother Nature and saying, hey, like,
Mhm.
I think this plant knows what it's doing. Let's trust it a little bit.
Yeah, I see. I see. The process is they call it washing. They say that Rick Simpson oil is made by washing cannabis beans.
Yeah, and they can do that with
Um,
like cold water. They can do it with like butane oil. There's different
yes,
solvents.
oils.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. And that extracts the natural oil of what the plant has, the whole ingredients from the plant,
Yep. Yeah,
into
all
the oil,
that
and
different, that
that's what you
unique
take.
profile. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, mhm.
Okay. Can people get this in like any state in America?
Any state where it's recreational, you can buy it at
Okay.
dispensaries. And if you
Okay.
have a medical
Okay.
license, you should be able to get it anywhere with medical as well.
Yeah. But
Um,
that means you can get it in a lot of places in Manhattan. There's a lot of like
I think,
so-called weed shops that are popping up and trucks that are moving
yeah,
here and there.
those are not legitimate. I would not go to any of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
but can you get that? Can people get that in the like if that's what they're familiar with? Can they find
yeah,
Rick Simpson oil there?
without a medical license, I wouldn't I wouldn't trust what I'm getting at a place in New York City because it's not recreational yet. I mean,
Okay.
ideally, like I would honestly trust a friend. I mean, I have my dad ship stuff to me, drive stuff to me. I mean, I've got friends in Colorado and Massachusetts, so you know, I either have somebody go to a dispensary, and I also have some people that I know and trust that make, full spectrum oil. They work with grow operations, et cetera. So there are ways to track it down, but I would not do, one of the trucks or one of the weed shops in the city unless you specifically have a medical.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm glad that I asked you.
Yeah.
I mean, I have lots of patients who use CBD both internally and externally. I think you're the first one who's actually used anything that has THC or so-called psychoactive, whole plant, whole
Mhm.
cannabis um, extract or product.
Yeah.
It's
And I do
great.
think
It's
there
great.
are there are places for, extracting specific chemicals, just CBD, et cetera.
Mhm.
But when it
Mhm.
comes to real severe pain or cancer treatment or whatever it is where your body is really going through it,
Mhm.
there are benefits to psychoactive chemicals beyond just
Mhm.
mentally a break or whatever it may be.
Mhm. Okay. And so, how do people find like this level of medical marijuana product?
Um,
Do they ask their doctor? Can they just like look online, medical marijuana?
I'm not really sure. I've been meaning to get a license for myself, but I have friends and family near dispensaries. So, and I have
Mhm.
dispensaries that I know and trust and friends in the industry.
Mhm. Okay.
So I would probably, the safest bet would probably be going to a state with recreational cannabis, which is, Massachusetts has it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about
And then
Connecticut.
bringing it back.
Yeah, Rhode Island, I think, has it. Yeah, that's probably the safest route. I think we're getting to a
Mhm.
point where buying
Mhm.
things online is going to be more well regulated and safer.
Mhm.
So
So you have to purchase it. Sorry, I have to do this again.
yeah,
So it has to be purchased in a state in which recreational marijuana is legal.
that's the only way to guarantee that what you're getting has been actually tested and is safe.
Mhm.
Would
Mhm.
be from an actual dispensary. So in New York, if you have a medical card, you can go to a real dispensary and you can get,
Mhm.
cannabis that has been tested and extracts, et cetera.
Mhm.
Or you can go to any state where it's already legal and everything they're selling you is going to be, tested, et cetera.
Mhm.
It's not to say that there aren't safe sources elsewhere,
Mhm.
but those are connections that you have to make over time. I have those connections in my life. Most people don't. So I would
Mhm.
recommend, just as in an abundance of caution, going to an actual
Mhm.
dispensary either with a card or at a place where you're not required to have one, because then you know that what you're getting has been tested, is safe, is produced in a monitored facility, et cetera.
Okay. Okay. And you don't know anything about the medical marijuana card for New York, right?
I don't, but I've been meaning to get one. So if I go
But
through
it's
the
not something that,
process,
yeah.
yeah, it's not something I've done in the past now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Wow. It's like what I'm seeing here, cannabis.ny.gov is you have to be a patient. Then you register with a registry and that gives you an ID card and then you can buy the medical cannabis from a dispensary.
Yeah, I think I will
Seems like
jump through those hoops because
yeah.
there are discounts when you're a medical
Mhm.
patient. So you
Mhm.
avoid some of the taxes, and generally there's like a medical rate and a recreational rate. So
And you're probably in a situation right now where it would qualify you, right?
I would think so, yeah. And I've been
Yeah.
using it throughout this whole process. So I would
Yeah.
imagine most doctors would be.
Okay.
I've also, it's all in my charts with my doctors too. I've been upfront about cannabis use. So I
Yeah.
would think that I should be able to get a medical card pretty easily if I pursued it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But it might be kind of difficult for other people to get if they're not already being followed by a doctor, if they're at the beginning of the process of getting diagnostics or figuring out what's wrong.
Yeah.
It might not be a quick thing for people to
Yeah, it may not
procure.
be. And so in that instance, I would recommend just finding the closest recreational state, maybe calling a
Yeah.
few dispensaries and asking what they have for full spectrum, and
Yeah.
do a road trip. It's illegal, obviously, to drive with it over border,
Sure.
but if you're below like an ounce in New York, I think it's like a ticket and they can't even like legally really hassle you over it. So
Yeah. But as far as physically getting your hands on it, that's the only two ways to get it. You either get on the registry for medical marijuana or somehow get some from an adjacent state where recreational marijuana is
yeah,
legal.
or
Okay.
somebody that
Yeah.
produces it, and I mean,
Yeah.
not all cannabis products and extracts go through the dispensaries. There are
Yeah.
high quality operations that I know and trust, and they make their own extractions, and then those, some of those go directly to caretakers and they go to patients, without going through all of the approval processes. So there
Mhm.
are other ways still to get it outside of the government purview, but unless you're somebody, like me, where I've made connections in the cannabis world for 15 years, I would think most people want to go the legal route and just play it super safe.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Are you comfortable with my including all that information about
Yeah,
your having connections for 15 years? Okay. I'm not going to use your last name or your image.
yeah,
Um, okay. I think that's about it. I would like to know if at any point you had a kind of a moment where you said to yourself, if anybody had told me that did this for my body or took care of my body in this way or whatever for a year or something prior to this pain, that I would have avoided this whole thing. I definitely would have done it. You know, I had severe pain twice. And both times I was like, if I had known a year ago that this was coming, I would have tried whatever physical movement, whatever nutrition, whatever lifestyle changes I could have done to try to avoid it. Did you have any moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight is 2020, you know. So
Mhm.
understanding this, I mean, I didn't know that you could be in this much pain from an injury like this. You know, I mean, it
Mhm.
really, it caught me off guard and really shook me.
Mhm.
So yeah, with that hindsight, I would have done so many things differently. Um, you know, I think I'm just starting to better understand,
Mhm.
you know, how to carry myself.
Mhm.
And I don't know, can you see that? Is it
Yeah,
backward?
8 steps to a
Free
pain.
back. It's
8 steps
Esther.
to a pain-free back.
Yeah, Esther.
Esther.
I'll text you.
Yeah.
But this book is the best content that I've ever found. It was recommended to me by a colleague, and he was like, "Oh, you know, I've got people in my family; their lives were changed by this book." And I was talking earlier about, you know, kinesthetic traditions, and this woman, you know, traveled all over the world and saw that in many places, non-developed countries, there is this kinesthetic tradition of holding your body the way that the human body was designed to be held, which is anteverted pelvis. You know, there's some bend in the lower lumbar, but like we frequently like slouch and sort of have like a severe S in our spine. And what we really want is to have the pelvis tilted forwards a little bit, that initial bend here, and then straighter. And she talked, you know, there's techniques for stretching your spine, sitting and lying down, and a process for walking in a way that's better. So, you know, I mean, I think my path forward is going to be, you know, internalizing these learnings. It's going to be, you know, acupuncture. It's going to be movement therapy. I want to get back into yoga.
Mhm.
You know,
Great.
so there's a lot that needs to happen. But I think I think very, very, very few people actually know what good posture is. We're like, oh, like sit up. You know what I mean? Like, what does sit up mean? Like, what does that look like?
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that's
Oh, so this is so I'm just reading on Wikipedia about the author Esther Gokale, who's a licensed acupuncturist and a yoga instructor. She's in Silicon Valley, and her method became popular in around 2010. And it looks like she may also have some training with, she has some experience with repetitive strain injury, and looks like she may have some experience with things like Alexander technique. Yeah, the posture guru of Silicon Valley. Okay, now she's an acupuncturist, and I haven't heard of her. How can and I treat back pain? How can this be?
yeah.
Well,
I was surprised that I haven't
the
heard
things
about
I
her
learned
either.
from clients. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been 10 years that I've had back pain, and, you know, I've
Yeah,
spoken to a lot of people. I've, you know, been
yeah.
to professionals, and nobody has explained posture the way that she does in this book. And things are clicking for me in a way that I'm excited about. And this, I mean, this should be information that we pass on to our kids as they learn to. And she even points out, like, babies do all this stuff right. You know, we
Yeah,
unlearn it over time. You know,
yeah.
naturally, our bodies want to function the way they're supposed to.
Mhm.
And, you know, so it's, you know, I feel, you know, fortunate to have found this. And so I'm just looking forward to applying, you know, this correct posture to my everyday life,
Mhm.
and, you know, continuing, you know, down the different movement paths.
Yeah. Wow. The go feel method. Okay. All right. Great. Well, it's been a long enough road, and I'm glad that you're coming out, gotten some relief from the surgery and healing out.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a long road, but, you know, all things
Yeah, it's
considered,
also a learning process.
yeah, it's a learning process. And, you know, it has been difficult, but uh overall the hand in life I've been dealt is not something that I would not roll the dice again. You know, I still feel fortunate in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
just got to make sure. I mean, whether we like it or not, our bodies don't go anywhere.
Yeah. All right, Tyler, thanks a lot for sharing your journey and for all the knowledge that you've accumulated along the way.
More than
I
happy.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. I
I'm sure it's going to
appreciate
help
that.
some people.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
Cool. All right. Do you want to schedule for acupuncture while we are?
Yeah, I was
on
gonna
the,
say 3:20 on Friday.
let me see.
I couldn't remember my password before the call, so.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll put you in for them. Okay.
And if there's anything,
You're in.
as you're going through, I know you're gonna like chop up the video and stuff, but if there's anything in particular that, stands out to you, I'm very happy to write a few sentences, because obviously, it's
Thank
a
you.
lot of tangential bits and pieces here.
Yeah.
So if you're looking
Yeah.
for, something distilled a little bit more, whatever
Okay.
I can do, if it's, writing a couple paragraphs or if it's a couple little snippets, happy to do it.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tyler. I don't think you realize how generous you've been with your time and your vulnerability. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate having the space to share it a little bit.
Yeah, man. All right. Have a great day. We'll see you on Friday.
All right. Sounds good, Steve. Take care.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.